Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher in Los Angeles, trying to bring viewpoint diversity on a bunch of controversial topics with this podcast. Today's topic is not that controversial, I guess, but it's an issue that is pretty complex, and we're going to try and flush out what it is, even though I think the majority of American citizens would all be on the same page with this concept. I think that it's a lot easier said than done. My guest is Jacy Good. She is an advocate and activist with Hang Up and Drive, and the topic is going to be texting and driving. So it's a a tough kind of road to get to talk about this because so many lives are affected by it, but also so many people do it day in and day out, knowing the dangers. So, Jacy, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Please just introduce yourself to my audience and tell us a little bit about how you got into this as your life's work, essentially.
Absolutely. So I am Jacy. Right now I live in White Plains, New York, but I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I went away to college in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I had this incredible college experience, and by my graduation day, I had my life figured out, that I was going to move to New York City and work for Habitat for Humanity, get married to the kid that I had dated the last 4 years, do all those things that you kind of imagine will happen in your life. But my parents and I just had to make this 90-minute drive back home from my graduation. It's the last time we're ever going to make this trip because I'm done with school. We didn't make it home from that drive. A young man, an 18-year-old high school senior, actually was talking on his cell phone, put his phone on speakerphone. It seemed like he was doing everything right. He was looking out the windshield and stopped at the red light, but then was so cognitively distracted, turned left through the red light that he was at. The semi truck that swerved to miss him hit my family's car. My parents were both killed on impact. I don't have any memories for months. I'm coming to in the hospital. I've got a shaved head and huge surgical scars all over my body. Half my body doesn't work. I can't comprehend what happens to me or my parents or anything. Through months of rehab and therapies and trying to get my life back, I came to learn that story I shared. And it didn't make sense to me. I started doing research and learning about how much we know about this big idea of distracted driving, that when we sit down in the driver's seat, anything that's not driving the car is distracted driving. And we all know that, but it's kind of hard to train ourselves to be the best drivers that we can be. So I worked trying to get laws passed in Pennsylvania. My name was out there. I'm sharing this story on Oprah's TV show, getting press all around the world, speaking at the United Nations. And my life was very little other than therapy and trying to get back the life that I had worked to build for myself. But I suddenly had this mission that I needed to bring something positive out of what it started as that worst day of my life. And so it's ballooned into this incredible career, sharing this story, trying to get the world to see that when we're in the car, we have each other's lives in our hands, and we got to take advantage of the opportunity to change the world, I think, for the better when we get in the car.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. So I guess the challenge of this is that we know it's wrong. We know that distracted driving is wrong. And we go, it's just something I can handle it. I'm good at it. Or, it's wrong, but it'll be really quick. But how do we take your story and we get people to change their behavior? It's so difficult. What you have in front of you, Jacy, is so hard because we already know it's wrong, and yet we do it because thousands of people probably in that area on that day were doing the same thing that kid was doing, and yet that caused that thing to completely upend your life forever. How do we jump over that gap, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's so important to remember that our phones are designed to be hard to put down. Our phones are incredible
Oh
tools.
yeah.
I love my phone. I am on
Yeah.
my phone all the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
except when I sit down in the driver's seat. It's about figuring out what works for you because we are all different. For me, I have to be able to reclaim my willpower. Like, when was the last time you went a day without checking Facebook, without using your phone? It's hard. It's a really tough temptation, but when you set the habit, when you get used to it, it feels so incredible to actually have time to yourself. And it
Mhm.
sounds silly, but
Mhm.
you think about it, we don't have any free time anymore because we are always engaged with something. Because any free moment we get, you got to catch up on your Instagram stories. It's everything. And again, I love it all. It's a great tool. But, as my parents taught me, you can swear when you're around us, but don't curse when you're in front of the grandparents. It's a
Yeah.
time and a place. And so for me, the car is neither the time nor the place for me to be on my phone.
Yeah. I mean, I have a long commute. It's like an hour and 20 minutes each way in the morning. And I just look left, looked right. I would say a majority. I would say
Yes.
51% of people are on their phone in one way or another. And it could be in stop and go traffic. It could just be when they're going 70 miles an hour, but it's everywhere. You talk about willpower. That's been a concept that's come up on this podcast a lot. Is like, it can be getting into an ice bath or something really hard, getting through a hard workout, but it can also be, I had Mike O'Keefe on, and we talked about reading a book. It can be really hard for people. Just sitting down and reading a book takes a lot of willpower, and putting your phone away for a little bit takes that willpower to do what you know to be right, even though it's challenging. What are your thoughts on autonomous driving? Because I've actually talked about that a bit, that we're moving into more self-driving. And if you have, I have a Tesla, fancy now, and, and then it just drives me. And I am more inclined, being honest, to be on my phone if I'm like, all right, well, I'm trusting Elon Musk, the super genius, to be driving me. But that's not perfect. But is that a glimmer of hope in the way that we're probably going to have more autonomous driving in the future? Have you thought about that with your efforts?
Yes. Autonomous cars will save us. Autonomous cars are incredible when they exist. As you say, it mostly drives itself, but we're kind of still in this scary middle ground that there are times when you're going to need to take control. And anytime there's been something bad that happened in something like a self-driving Tesla, it's because the driver was alerted they needed to take control, and they
Yeah.
almost always were distracted by something. You're looking at these things, they don't work here in the Northeast. A lot of the times, if there's snow on the ground, then the car can't see the lines on the road. They don't always see darker skinned people, which is a big issue. They don't see children at night, these issues that we're starting to see, that they'll save us someday, but we're not quite there yet.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even know about like darker skinned people at night. Like that,
Yeah.
what a headline that is. Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. But I teach 11th and 12th grade. Last year I taught 10th grade too. So these are young drivers, and I talk to them too. I mean, I it might have just been a coincidence because there's accidents that happen. I'm sure you know the statistics on distracted driving and stuff, but I would assume that it'd be more young people. Just, I'm 40 years old. I was driving since the day I turned 16, delivery jobs, long commutes and everything like that. I'm better because I have my Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours in, but so many of my students, they're young. They don't know basic stuff about driving because they just don't have the muscle memory yet,
Mhm.
and they're obsessed with their phones because they're 16 years old too. So it's almost like a perfect storm of both of those things. They're more addicted to their phones than I am, and they're
Yeah.
worse of a driver than I am, or someone our age is. So it really is a perfect storm for young people. But again, how do you change your message, I guess, Jacy, for people who are adults in the world versus young people? Like, do you present it differently?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I speak to anyone who will host me, so it's mostly high schools. I'll tell you, one of the
Mm.
biggest questions we get from high school kids is, how do we get our moms and dads to get off their phones? And then we go and talk to adults, and they say, well, this is such an issue for kids. How are we going to get our kids off the phones? It's the kind of thing, it doesn't work unless all of us are following the same rules, no matter how much experience we have. If we're not looking at the road, or if our brains aren't paying attention to the road, we can't be a safe driver, no matter how old we are. So it's sharing the story with every level and reminding parents that kids drive just like they will. So even if you think you're perfectly safe, you got to drive the way you want your kids to drive, and kids can hold their parents to that same standard and say, I'm going to drive just like you. So let's all follow these same rules.
Yeah, I mean, the children, I have 3 children of my own, like, they learn more from your modeling, I think, than anything else. You know, the whole
Yes.
"do as I say, not as I do" type of thing doesn't work. So for young people, they're watching you, and if the parents are always doing it, then they even if they say don't, they still will. They're gonna follow it. So it's a responsibility of the adults to model this kind of behavior.
Yes.
Um, here's I guess where we're at with this is the laws don't seem to make much of a difference. And you know, I talk a lot about prohibition because like I teach history and stuff, prohibition of alcohol. It's
Yeah.
like people wanted to drink, they're still going to drink. And I use texting and driving in my class a lot because I talk about when they're like, well, why don't we just make a law for this, law for that? We're talking about gun laws or whatever it is. It's like how there's laws in California against texting and driving, but how many people do it? Like how it comes down to a personal responsibility thing, and teaching people personal responsibility is so difficult to do. Have you seen statistics on the difference when they've instituted laws versus not?
Yes. The laws do make a
They
difference
do.
to
Okay.
an extent. That crashes and deaths go down, especially initially in the early days. There are always big ad campaigns and education that really makes a difference initially, and then people kind of get used to it. And there's no state that does anything to outlaw hands-free usage, which I don't know that we'll ever see, but it makes us drive like a drunk driver. We're 0.5% safer if we're using the Bluetooth versus holding the phone because of that cognitive distraction. I don't know that we'll ever see it. So I don't know what the whole solution is other than getting back to that self-driving car idea.
Yeah.
The laws make a difference, but for me, I moved to New York shortly after this happened, where this is one of the first states to pass laws regarding cell phones and driving, and it's definitely noticeably better compared to Pennsylvania, where I grew up, where there's still very weak laws. And you notice that difference, but it's still hundreds of thousands of tickets being written every year trying to get people to stay in line with those laws. So it's not enough. And I kind of have been able to see that as I've traveled the country sharing this story, learning that I could use what I was given to maybe get people to care. Maybe they can relate to something I say. They can imagine what it would be like on their wedding day when there's no last dance with their dad because of a cell phone, or you can't zipper your coat because half your body doesn't work. And if I can get someone to relate to me personally, maybe that can inspire an actual behavioral change. And we've seen that with things like gun laws and survivors of those kinds of incidents, that that kind of personal story can have a lot more power than just passing a law.
Are your injuries permanent now, or are they slowly getting better? Is it because it's been
So there
what? It's
was a
been
whole
15
long,
years,
yeah,
right?
it's coming up on 15
Yeah.
years. And there was a long list of things that have healed over time. But I think my most severe injury was a traumatic brain injury. So in the early days, it was learning how to read. I'm even able to put words together into a sentence that makes sense. And then slowly I was making very good progress. I was working harder than I have ever worked in my life. But the injuries that remain are partial paralysis on my left side. So it was the right side of my brain that was injured, which controls my left side. So I have no movement at all in my wrist or my fingers, my ankle, and my toes on the left side of my body. I can't run. I can't ride a bike or throw a baseball around, which, like, in the old days, those are my favorite things to do that I don't get anymore. And that's seemingly forever.
You know, I'm a student of John Haidt. I love Jonathan Haidt. He wrote The Righteous Mind and stuff. I use a lot of his moral foundations stuff in my work. But he said the human brain is a story processor, not a logic processor. I think that's probably why you're effective in what you're doing, is because of such a powerful story. But so much of my job, JC, is like, because I'm 40 and I've failed a lot of things in my life. So then I talk to these teenagers and I'm like, here's how I screwed up. Here's how this. I was a custodian going to night school for a year. Like, it wasn't great. You don't want to pick, gum out of urinals and stuff like that. So take it from me, do this or do that. But sometimes you have to learn things the hard way. And that's the hard part is, you can say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But then sometimes they're like, I'll be fine. And then they learn it the hard way. And at that point, I mean, in your situation, it was too late when it comes to, losing your parents. It's like the biggest tragedies possible are the hard way. And so much of my job is trying to, and why I wanted to bring you on here to talk about this, is about how do we get to the audience to say, like, look, like, you will learn this at some point. I hope it's not losing a loved one. I hope it's not going through a horrible injury. I hope it's not even something like how would you live with it? That 18-year-old, something that one of the first assignments I give my US history class before we get into any history is I have them tell a story that was a positive story of their life, like a big story. So it's like I hit the winning goal in soccer or whatever. And then I have them tell the same story from 3 different perspectives. So what was that like from the goalie's perspective? What was it like from the goalie's mom's perspective? And it gets them to go like, oh, wow, yeah, like the way I see the world isn't the only way. Like, I don't know who the young man was that was responsible for that, but there's a possibility at the very least that he has deep demons now because of what he did to you, what he did to your family. And the tragedy has massive ripple effects. The truck driver's family. I mean, the ripple effects are huge. And I think that if we're just focusing on the individual, on the person who's listening to this podcast going like, okay, well, I shouldn't because maybe I could get hurt. It's like, no. It's way bigger than you. And I think that's just a general way of thinking about ourselves and our place in the world, is that what we do matters. I have that big on my classroom, like, what you do actually matters. You matter. Your daily decisions, your everyday decisions matter because of the ripple effects, of positive ripple effects or negative ripple effects that occur. But learning things the hard way, it's sometimes, as much as I believe in story, I don't know. If I knew, I'd be a much better teacher. I don't know how to teach people the easy way of just listen to me,
Yeah. And I love that you use that phrasing, ripple effects, because that is my challenge every time I share this story. That you can imagine, you're going to create a ripple in this world, and you get to choose. Are you going to create the ripple of you hurt someone or you kill someone? And you have to live with that negative, painful ripple. I talk about my mom being a teacher, her students coming to school the next day to learn that she was never coming back to school again because she had been killed. You get to choose if you create that negative ripple of pain, or you can be kind. You can get to the car 5 minutes early and have time to finish up whatever you need to do on your phone without putting other lives at risk. I think this world is hard enough as it is, especially over these last 3 years. You get that chance to be nicer to someone else. I think that's an obligation that we have to each other when we get in our cars.
Yeah, and I think whatever angle you have to tell, I see kids all the time. They're like, I'm not talking on the phone. They hold it like this, like it makes some sort of difference. But I think almost like whatever angle you need, and I think that one of them, having talked to you and learned about your story, to invite you on here, is like, I think almost like, not even if I just think about it for me, I'm like, I'm a good driver, I'll be fine. But it's almost like, maybe for me, and maybe this will help other people, is like a respect for you and what you've gone through, is just like, out of respect. You don't see me. We're not gonna, you don't see me driving every day, but just out of respect for you, JC. And like, it's like, I think people hear your story and they go, oh my gosh, I feel so helpless that this woman lost her parents and so parts of her faculties and miss out on these opportunities. Oh, I wish there was something I could do. It's like, yeah, there is something you can do.
Yes.
And it might be very small, but like, the ask that you are doing with your work is just, if you feel bad about kind of my situation or what I went through, you kind of feel like a little helpless to do something good in the world, do what I'm asking. And that it means that what happened isn't going to be in vain, you know?
And
So
yeah. And it feels, I'm a stranger. People don't know me,
yeah.
but I've been to hundreds of schools all over this country. Every single community has been impacted by this in some manner. So many kids share stories with me. And it's the kind of thing, if it hasn't touched your community yet, it's only a matter of time. And so when I share this story, I say, use this big, awful story that I was given. Let this be the ripple that touches you instead of waiting for you needing to stand in shoes like mine and having to actually live with this pain. Maybe you can use what I was given to try and use that to transform your own behavior.
And it might save a lot of lives. Your work might save a lot of lives, JC. Like I've talked about these instances through history. When Magic Johnson got diagnosed with HIV, I'm guessing that was a bad day in his life. But his research and his wealth and his connections and his prominent name
Yes.
is part of the reason why I know people with HIV who will not die, they'll die from old age. Like
Yes.
there are positives. Eliza Hamilton lost her son and her husband in like duels at a young age, but then she used that grief to create an orphanage. There's so many examples of people who turn their tragedy into something good for humanity. And I see you doing that as well. And I think that for the rest of us to honor that just through our behavior is kind of like the way that we can show it, even if it's just to ourselves, we can show our concern and appreciation for what you're doing. And
And I
and it kind
think
of
for me, that's why I'm still here. Like doctors call me a miracle. There is no real scientific explanation of how I survived what I was given. I was given this awful hand of cards, but I am here with a purpose. And to hear you say that, it's such a reminder of every one of us has a purpose and we got to find it and use it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, when people have these nihilistic things in their life where life doesn't matter, I don't matter. It's like, no, like you got to get rid of that. You have to you have a purpose, and you clearly have a purpose. You for being here, JC, like you have a purpose now, and you're living that purpose. And I'm so glad to just bring you on here, even briefly, just to share your story and get people to go towards what you're doing and support it and everything like that. Where can people see your work, support it, maybe bring you into their schools and things like that?
So my website is hangupanddrive.com. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Jacy Good out there on social media, so that's a good way to keep in touch too.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for being here, sharing your story. I hope that this powerful story gets to people in a way that just stats won't. Because as much as Ben Shapiro says facts don't care about your feelings, I don't think that's the way that we change hearts and minds and behaviors. I don't think it's how we change behavior, and we need to change behavior in this area. It's a weird time of a constant inundation of technology, and yet we're driving everywhere. So it's really, really important. The work you're doing is really important. Thank you for spending this time with me.
Thank you so much. To me, did I change you? I'm looking for one person at a time. We're talking today. We want to change everyone. I want to change everyone, but one-on-one right now, I'm always just looking for the person that I'm talking to.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, I think just honoring what you've been through is what would work for me more so than just like I can't handle it or whatever it is. I think I told you before we were recording that my wife sent an alarm up on my phone for like 2 years. It was on my phone every morning when I left. It was like, don't text and drive, your family loves you. I was like, ah, but that helped. But this helps more. So
Thank you.
thank you for being here, Jason.
Thank you for this.